Right now, you can walk out your front door, you can cross a street, board a train, leave your city, leave your country, and no one will stop you. You never think about it. It is the most ordinary freedom there is. Now imagine a wall goes up overnight, straight through the middle of your street. On one side, your home. On the other side, everyone you love. And soldiers with orders to shoot anyone who tries to cross. This is not a nightmare. For a young engineering student named Joachim, it was a Tuesday in August of 1961. And what he did about it would take him 11 meters underground, into the most dangerous stretch of soil on Earth. You think of walls as things that keep enemies out. But the Berlin Wall was built to keep an entire population in. When it went up in 1961, it did not divide two armies, it divided families. It cut a mother from her son, a man from the woman he loved, sometimes in the space of a single night. And the people trapped on the eastern side were no longer citizens of a country. They were, in the words of one German president decades later, inmates of a state. Joachim Neumann was one of them. A civil engineering student, only a few credits short of his degree, living in East Germany under a government that had just locked the doors. He did the one thing that felt impossible and necessary at the same time. In 1961, he borrowed the passport of a Swiss student, walked up to the border guards at a checkpoint, and bluffed his way across to the west. It worked. He was free. But here is the part you need to understand. Freedom, when the people you love are still trapped, does not feel like freedom. It feels like guilt. Joachim had made it out. His girlfriend, Christa, had not. And so a strange thing happened in the mind of this quiet young man. He had escaped the cage, and instead of running from it, he turned around and started digging his way back under it. Because the wall had a weakness. It stood 12 meters tall, guarded by towers, dogs, floodlights, and a wide raked strip of sand called the death strip, where anyone who set foot was shot on sight. But the wall only guarded the surface. It did not guard the ground beneath. And a city is not just streets and buildings, it is also everything underneath them. Cellars, sewers, soil. Joachim joined the tunnelers. His first project in 1962 brought 29 people to freedom over 2 nights. It became known as Tunnel 29. But his own girlfriend was not among them. He hadn't been able to warn her in time. The next attempt ended in disaster. The Stasi, East Germany's secret police, discovered the dig. And among those they arrested was Christa. She was sentenced to prison. Think about what that means for a moment. The very act meant to free her had helped put her behind bars. Most people would have stopped. The risk was no longer abstract. It had a face, and that face was now in a cell because of the thing he kept doing. And yet, in the spring of 1964, Joachim went back underground. This time the plan was bigger than anything before it. A team of about 35 people, many of them West Berlin students, would dig from the cellar of an abandoned bakery at 97 Bernauer Strasse, down 11 to 12 meters, then forward in a passage barely wide enough for one body to crawl through on hands and knees. Under the street, under the signal fences wired to alarms, under the death strip, under the wall itself, all the way to a crumbling outhouse in a courtyard on the eastern side at Strelitzer Strasse 55. In total, about 145 meters. It would become the longest, deepest escape tunnel of the entire Cold War. You cannot picture how hard this was unless you slow down and live inside it. There were no machines. They dug by hand, in the dark, in wet clay, like soil that clung to everything. They hauled the earth out in flour sacks, sack after sack, for 5 months. They slept in the bakery between shifts. The air ran thin the deeper they went. A collapse could bury a man alive in seconds, and no one above ground would ever know. And the whole time, there was a fear worse than the soil. Betrayal. The Stasi was one of the most powerful secret police forces on Earth, and it did not rely on walls alone. It relied on informants. Neighbors reporting neighbors. Friends reporting friends. One of the men who lived through it later said the digging was terrible, but the truly unbearable part was never knowing who to trust. The Stasi had a name for their method of grinding people down. They called it decomposition. the slow disintegration of a person's relationships until they broke. By early October of 1964, the tunnel was finished. And now came the most delicate part of all. Getting the word out. The escapees on the eastern side were given a code. They were to arrive at the building on Strelitzer Strasse, acting like ordinary Sunday visitors, and whisper a single word to the helpers waiting inside. The word was Tokyo. The 1964 Summer Olympics were about to open in that city days away. It was the kind of word that could be said out loud without meaning anything to a listening guard. Picture what it took to walk up to that door. One of the escapees, a 21-year-old named Andreas, described counting the house numbers down the street. 53, 54, 55. And just across from him, only about 10 meters away, a booth with a border guard inside, his heart hammering in his chest. One wrong glance, one nervous move, and it was over. Inside, escapees slipped off their shoes and tiptoed through the hallway to the courtyard, then lowered themselves one by one into a hole in the ground, barely wider than their shoulders. Over 2 nights, on the 3rd and 4th of October, they came, sisters and brothers, parents, children, 57 people in total, crawling through the cold dark on their hands and knees toward a light at the far end. And on the eastern mouth of the tunnel, greeting them as they emerged from the earth, was Joachim. He had almost missed it. He'd had an exam on the day the escape began. When he got back to his apartment, there was a letter waiting. It was from Krista. She had been released early from prison. She was back in Berlin. With only hours before he had to be at the tunnel, he scrambled, got word to her, and took his position underground. And late that night, among the 57 faces rising out of the dark, one of them was hers. After years of tunnels that had freed strangers but never hurt, she crawled the length of his tunnel and came up into his arms. They would later marry. They stayed married for the rest of their lives. But the story does not end in pure triumph, because freedom this real is never free. On the second night, border guards noticed something wrong. There was a confrontation near the tunnel. Shots were fired in the dark. In the chaos, an East German soldier named Egon Schultz was killed, struck by a bullet from one of his own comrades. For decades, the East German state told a lie. They blamed Western agents for his death. The truth only came out after the wall finally fell in 1989, and the files were opened, and a nation got to read what had really happened underground. So what does a hole in the ground, dug by hand 60 years ago, have to say about you? This? The wall that divided Berlin was one of the most fortified barriers ever built by human beings. And it still could not hold. Not because an army broke it, but because ordinary people, students and lovers and siblings, were willing to crawl through wet earth on their hands and knees for the chance to stand next to someone they loved. Your ancestors did not survive because they were the strongest or the fastest. They survived because the pull toward the people they belonged to was stronger than fear, stronger than walls, stronger than the ground itself. Right now, you can walk out your front door, and no one will stop you. 57 people once risked everything, crawling through the dark beneath a wall, for a freedom you will use today without noticing. The next time you cross a street to reach someone you love, remember that somewhere, someone once dug 11 meters into the earth to do the very same thing.